December 16, 1944. 0530 hours. The Ardennes forest near Munchau, Germany. The air was a crystalline blade, so cold it seemed to freeze the breath. A dense fog clung to the snow-laden firs, a shroud that muffled sound and erased the world. For the American soldiers of the 38th Cavalry Squadron, this quiet sector had been a place of rest. But the quiet was a lie. At 0530, the lie was shattered. 1,000 German artillery pieces opened their throats in a single, coordinated roar. The frozen earth began to shudder. For the men of the 326th Volksgrenadier Division, advancing through the trees, this was the overture to Hitler's final gamble, Operation Wacht am Rhein. They were the tip of a spear, 200,000 men strong, an armored fist poised to smash through the weak American lines and seize Antwerp. The Führer had promised them victory. The initial surprise was absolute. The shells that screamed overhead were familiar. They were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had learned the calculus of survival. But this morning, the music of the battlefield changed. A new sound joined the symphony. It was not the familiar crump of a ground impact. It was a sharp, vicious crack high in the air above them, a precise geometric pattern of detonations unfolding directly overhead. From these blossoms of fire, a torrent of steel fragments descended, a vertical hailstorm of death that no foxhole could defy. The veterans looked up from their holes, their faces a mask of confusion that curdled into terror. This was not artillery. This was witchcraft. The source of this new equation was a secret held in the mind of Colonel Oscar Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group. As reports flooded his command post of the 38th Cavalry being swallowed by the German tide, Axelson faced a commander's crucible. His conventional artillery was a bucket against a flood, the rounds burying themselves in the soft, snow-covered ground. He had at his disposal a weapon so secret its use on European soil was explicitly forbidden by the highest command. Standing orders dictated it was for anti-aircraft use only, to prevent a dud from falling into enemy hands. The fear was that Germany could reverse engineer it. For Axelson, the orders and the reality on his maps were two different worlds. Following orders meant annihilation. In that moment of terrible clarity, he made a decision that would echo through the war. He broke the rules. He picked up a field telephone and gave an order that could have led to his court-martial. He authorized his gunners to fire the POZIT shell, the proximity fuse. He was unleashing the most closely guarded technological secret of the war, second only to the atomic bomb. He was betting his career on a piece of technology the Germans could not comprehend. The heart of this secret was a device no larger than a common coffee can, a mundane object of American domestic life, now repurposed into a harbinger of intelligent death. This coffee can was packed with the zenith of American genius, a self-contained, miniaturized radar system. Inside every fuse, engineers had squeezed 130 delicate electronic components, chief among them 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes. The very concept was madness to engineers of the era. An artillery shell, upon firing, is subjected to a force of 20,000 Gs and spun at 25,000 revolutions per minute. Any normal vacuum tube would be instantly pulverized, but these were not normal. This was the culmination of a program of breathtaking ambition, driven with Manhattan Project-level urgency by Dr. Merle Tuve at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. The challenges were monumental. A power source was needed, but no battery could survive the launch. The solution was ingenious. A small glass ampule filled with electrolyte. The shock of firing would shatter the ampule, soaking a stack of plates and creating a wet cell battery for the few seconds of flight. The vacuum tubes themselves had to be completely reimagined. This challenge fell to a young physicist named Dr. James Van Allen. Van Allen and his team created ruggedized tubes, no larger than a pencil eraser, their internal elements supported by tiny ceramic discs and springs, designed to function perfectly under the hellish conditions. Each component was a masterpiece of miniaturization. The coffee can was a symbol of this uniquely American alchemy, taking the domestic and transforming it through sheer industrial might into a war-winning weapon. While German industry focused on wonder weapons of immense scale, American industry was perfecting the art of the small, the mass-produced, the impossibly complex made common. This program, codenamed Project A, cost over $1 billion 1940s, a sum exceeded only by the atomic bomb. The security surrounding it was absolute. Workers in the factories, the majority of them women, had no idea what they were building. At the Crosley Corporation in Cincinnati, women who had once assembled refrigerators now meticulously soldered the internal components, told only it was a new type of radio. At Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric, entire production lines operated under a veil of secrecy. Each fuse was given a unique serial number, tracked from factory to battlefield. By December 1944, this industrial behemoth was humming. American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses every single day. The cost, once $732 per unit, had been driven down by mass production to a mere $18. America was not just inventing the future, it was mass producing it at a price its enemies could not fathom. This was the force Colonel Axelson had just unleashed, the leading edge of a technological tsunami. The effect of Axelson's decision was instantaneous and horrifying for the attacking Germans. For the Volksgrenadiers, the world turned upside down. The sky itself seemed to become a weapon. Shells that should have whistled past now detonated with a terrifying crack directly overhead. Each explosion created a perfect, inverted cone of shrapnel, a shotgun blast from the heavens covering an area 50 times greater than a conventional ground burst. The tactical wisdom of a lifetime became useless. A deep foxhole offered no protection. Huddling behind a tree was a death sentence. Veterans who instinctively knew how to use terrain for cover were cut down where they stood, looking up in disbelief. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical. It seemed to know where they were. It felt personal. It felt inescapable. The German attack at Monschau, begun with such confidence, faltered, then stopped cold. The spear tip was blunted, not by a wall of men, but by a ceiling of steel. News of the weapon's stunning success rocketed up the chain of command. Axelson's unauthorized act had created a firestorm. He had proven its decisive power, but also violated a direct order. A court-martial was a real possibility. But as the full scope of the German offensive became terrifyingly clear, as reports poured in of American units being overrun, military dogma collided with battlefield desperation. On December 19th, with the situation deteriorating, General Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, made a momentous choice. Recognizing the risk of defeat was now greater than the risk of the secret being discovered, he formally requested authorization for the general use of proximity fuses against ground targets. The request was approved with unheard-of speed. By December 21st, the floodgates were open. A logistical miracle began as trucks laden with crates of the precious POZIT shells fanned out across the threatened front, racing down icy roads to deliver the new weapon. Nowhere was this delivery more critical than in the besieged town of Bastogne. There, the 101st Airborne Division were completely surrounded, an island of defiance in a sea of German armor. Their survival depended on their artillery. Just as the ring was closing, a desperate convoy got through, carrying the first allocation of proximity fused shells for the 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion. These men had light 75mm pack howitzers, but with the new fuses, These small guns became giant killers. When the Germans demanded surrender and General McAuliffe gave his legendary reply, "Nuts!" it was not mere bravado. It was a statement of faith in the new weapon. The German infantry attacks that followed walked into an abattoir. The 75mm shells now detonated 30 feet in the air, filling the sky with interlocking circles of death. Entire platoons vanished. Adding to this were the big guns of the 969th Artillery Battalion, an all-African-American unit whose 155mm howitzers created a ring of death around the perimeter. German prisoners spoke in fearful tones of the air-bursting shells, of veteran units breaking and fleeing in panic. The most chillingly precise demonstration of the fuse's lethality came on Christmas night, 1944. General George S. Patton's Third Army was driving north to relieve Bastogne. Near Echternach, a German battalion attempted a desperate infiltration across the frozen Sauer River under cover of darkness and fog. With conventional artillery, this was a difficult target, but the proximity fuse needed no eyes. General Patton, who witnessed the engagement, recorded it in his memoir. The American artillery, guided by map coordinates, opened fire. The shells flew into the dark fog and detonated at their optimal height, 30 feet above the river. For the men in the water and on the icy banks, there was no escape. Patton wrote, "The new POZIT ammunition was devastating. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. A single German battalion had been functionally annihilated in minutes. The news of the Sauer River slaughter spread like a virus through the German ranks. The Ardennes was a forest campaign, and the Germans had counted on the dense woods for cover. The trees that had been their allies suddenly became their enemies. In the forest, the fuse's effects were multiplied. When a shell detonated in the treetops, it unleashed a secondary storm of projectiles. The steel fragments were joined by thousands of wooden splinters, wooden bullets, ripped from the trees and propelled downwards at hundreds of feet per second. The fundamental tactics of forest fighting were rendered instantly useless. Taking cover behind a tree was futile when death came from above. The forest canopy, once a shield, was now a secondary ammunition magazine. A single 155mm shell could clear an area the size of a tennis court of all life. The German soldier, a superb tactician in this environment, found his expertise worthless. He was trapped in a forest that was actively trying to kill him. The German High Command's failure to understand what they were facing was a catastrophe rooted in institutional arrogance. German forces overran an ammunition depot and captured 20,000 intact proximity fuse shells. This should have been an intelligence coup. Instead, it led to one of the war's great ironies. German technical experts were rushed to examine the fuses. They disassembled the devices and stared at the contents in disbelief. Their conclusion was swift and unanimous. It was a trick. The fuses were impossible. The presence of delicate vacuum tubes inside an artillery shell violated every principle of their engineering knowledge. They concluded the Americans were using some kind of magnetic trigger, and the radio sets were decoys. The supreme irony was that Germany had been a pioneer in this field. But in 1940, Hitler had ordered the cancellation of all long-term weapons projects. Now their own engineers, blinded by dogma, refused to believe the Americans had perfected what they deemed insurmountable. They were being beaten by a ghost they refused to believe in. By early January 1945, the secret of the funny fuse was out. On January 10th, a German intelligence report finally stated the truth. The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse. No effective countermeasures exist. The admission was correct and far too late. The Battle of the Bulge was over. Hitler's last gamble had failed, with nearly 100,000 German casualties, many attributed to the 200,000 proximity fuse shells fired. Field Marshal von Rundstedt stated it plainly. The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks broke down because of artillery that seemed to have eyes. The legacy of that secret weapon would redefine the future. The miniaturized electronics became the seeds of the post-war tech boom. Dr. Van Allen would use the techniques to discover the radiation belts that bear his name. The concept of a weapon that could sense its environment was the direct ancestor of every smart bomb and guided missile. The story of the proximity fuse is the story of a coffee can. It represents a system that could foster curiosity, harness industrial might, and trust its people to achieve the impossible. The whistle of that shell was more than the sound of a battle being won. It was the sound of a new age of warfare being born,